Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another podcast. Today is a really great episode with a young CEO. So we really think y'all are going to love this. We're speaking with Vicki Knott. So Vicki literally automates the control room. She went from working at a major corporation, getting her ideas shut down, to going and starting her own business called Crux. It's the future of control room operations enabled by robotic industrial process automation. Her experience as a control room operator in commissioning systems utilizing the control room management of change process has allowed her to be a driving force at the forefront of robotic industrial process automation. We're going to deep dive into her vision and how this young 30-year-old is changing the industry. Vicki, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Fun to chat with the ladies.
Thank you for being on and for the podcast versus watching us on YouTube. You literally look like you're a fashion designer from New York. And I am like, it's amazing to see that because you're an engineer and you're building software that's changing the world. So it's so cool to kind of show that you can be whatever you wanna be in life.
The good old juxtaposition of it all, right?
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what was life like growing up in the East Coast of Canada for those of us who don't know what that's like.
Yeah, so I'm from what's considered Outport, Newfoundland. So my extended family are all fishermen. Spent most of my childhood in town of about 800 people. That's extremely remote. It's like an 8-hour drive to St. John's, Newfoundland, where there's lots of offshore oil stuff going on, and a good 8-hour boat ride to the continent. So I grew up in the middle of nowhere. It was I'd never heard of engineering, and I'd never heard of I'd never really heard of oil and gas either. So yeah, it was like a quiet kind of very community oriented upbringing. Like I think in terms of like my experience and how it impacts day to day, it's like I didn't really experience hierarchy. And so then when I went into the corporate world, I didn't really understand it, which was both a blessing and a curse. And then now a blessing and a curse when starting a business. So that was kind of interesting that way. So I left Newfoundland to go study forestry first. So I think you guys wanted to dive in a little bit in that.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that you were really interested in forestry, which maybe a lot of people on the podcast don't really understand. So if you could talk a little bit about that, but also you decided to change and actually study chemical engineering.
Yeah.
Which is a completely different path. So can you kind of talk to us a little bit about what made you want to go into forestry? And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, hold on, I want to do chemical engineering.
Yes. So my dad studied forestry. So he was like a forestry technician. I had worked, so he was at a pulp and paper mill in Corner Brook, Newfoundland. And I actually worked labor in the pulp and paper mill. So Friday and Saturday night shifts. So I quite liked that. But since dad was in forestry, I was like, okay, maybe I'll give forestry a try. So I studied it. I first went to the University of New Brunswick to study it. I then laid out logging roads in North Vancouver Island. So it's like 10-hour days, just like slogging through mountainous bush. Saw way too much wildlife, got hissed at by a cougar, and decided that was enough. I do not want to do this for a living. I was living in a logging camp too. Like it wasn't super fun. So I remembered how much I liked the pulp and paper mill. Like I was working labor, but like I loved it. It was such a cool, like dynamic, intense environment. And so, I had heard at this point, because I'd been at the University of New Brunswick, so I'd heard about engineering, but like I didn't have like high school physics even. So I was like, okay, well, I'd like to switch into engineering, but like I need to do some upgrading. So I took high school physics in community college and upgraded my math. And then decided, okay, well, I'm going to try for chemical engineering. I hear that it's the hardest one. So if I flunk out, I'll do civil. Sorry, civil guys. And so I went ahead and did it. And and did not flunk out. So coming out of that, there was quite a bit of opportunity in the pulp and paper space because I had such a great understanding of it. So like when I went and did co-op terms or like summer student jobs as a chemical engineer, as a chemical engineering student in pulp and paper, like I was actually able to develop predictive algorithms to control their wastewater treatment plant based on production. And I was published in a paper in the pulp and paper sector when I was about 19 years old, which is pretty cool. So I was definitely like finding my niche with respect to, I'm actually pretty good at math.
But wait, you were 19 and you wrote a paper. So, I mean, that is like most people that are 19, don't write a published paper. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing. So can you tell us like what made you like write this paper and how did you gain the right skill set in order to do this at 19?
So yeah, so it was, I was only in my like second year of chemical engineering at that point, like just starting it. And so it was just mathematics. It was like predictive mathematics. And so it was like, it's like, okay, well, if you have this changing if production is changing this much, the relation to the wastewater coming out of it and the whatever, I can't remember, BOD and COD, so your chemical oxygen demand, your biological oxygen demand. So then how those correlated to the time delay, so what we call your time constant, your dead times, with respect to the production that's happening. So it's like looking back, like it's not a complex algorithm, but like it wasn't something that they had thought about before, and they had thought about tying together the different units in the plant. It's like the plant was operated, like you operate the paper machines, you operate the thermomechanical pulping, you operate the wastewater plant. They weren't tying them together. So that was really kind of the interesting thing about that. My co-founder makes fun of me. He's like, you invented fleet forward control and you didn't even know it. And I was like, yeah, because I'd never taken that course yet. So, so I really, really loved, I loved the complexity of it. And like, I had a lot of support there. So like my co-op boss, he just was great. He, was just throwing like super hard challenges at me to see what I could do. And then he was just so impressed that I was actually able to figure it out. He's a cool guy. He also used to recommend my wine to me every Friday night and ask me what I ate for dinner. So he taught me all about wine.
Like a fun buzz. You seem really passionate about that pulp industry. What made you decide to leave it and go to oil and gas, which was very foreign to you?
So I had a bunch of job offers because of the paper, like when I graduated. But I had one job offer in oil and gas. And at the time, pulp and paper is doing what oil and gas is doing right now, like really plateauing and like some downsizing, lots of like M&A activity. So I wanted to go into something exciting, and I had a job offer in Calgary, and that job was in oil and gas and actually paid more. So I was like, I skied a lot growing up, like I love skiing. So I was like, why not move to Calgary and just give it a try? Like, I like to ski. So I did.
So while you were there, you really asked them that you wanted to be, in the operator room and you wanted to learn how that whole process worked. Can you explain how, the feedback that you got when you asked them that you wanted to be in the control room and why it took them so long to actually give you that position within the company?
Yeah, so the motivation behind it was the same, was based off of my experience in pulp and paper, right? So, having worked labor on the machines, I knew how to engineer solutions. And so when I got so actually this role is my second job in Calgary. So I only lasted about a year at the first one. It was a great company. I just didn't know enough about myself to know that I didn't fit in corporate. So when I went to this company, the second one, they were operating massive, some of the biggest oil pipelines in the world. And I was like, okay, well, if I don't know how to operate these assets, I don't know how to engineer solutions. So, they kind of looked at me like I had 10 heads for a while, but I started because no one had done it, right? No junior engineers had been doing that. Actually, no engineers had been doing that. So I just slowly made friends with the manager of the control room, and I just kind of kept pestering because I was I just felt like I didn't understand the process well enough. And it was just such a personal desire for me. So I finally talked them into it. It took me over a year to talk them into it. They let me train for 8 months and go through a full control room operator training program, and operate, very supervised ever so slightly on the console, which was really, really cool for very simple things. But the training simulators are extremely realistic to extremely representative of real life. And so I spent significant time operating one of the biggest batch pipeline systems in the world on their training simulator, which was really cool. Also spent then some time commissioning control systems in the field, so variable frequency drives and process control valves. I also worked with the commercial team, so understanding oil nominations on pipelines, maintenance scheduling. So definitely in my short time there, I got to do a lot because this organization, they had just commissioned a major asset, so they were just building the commercial team for it. So I was one of the early employees on the commercial team. So the opportunities were spectacular for the first few years that I was there. But then of course, any big giant company, they then reorg and then things go downhill.
That's incredible. I think more companies need younger people like yourself coming in and questioning and pushing those boundaries. And what's really important with you wanting to become an operator and really learning is, like you said, here you are being an engineer and trying to fix all of these problems and come up with solutions, but you don't even know like the true core of it. And that's something that's really nice with a lot of service companies is they do send a lot of their employees to the field, and you have to do field work to understand how all these tools work, how the rig works, so that when you do go in afterwards into the office, you know what you're talking about. So that's really awesome.
Absolutely. Like it's end user empathy, right? Like that's what's like in the tech world, it's end user empathy.
It's just funny when you said that they were looking at you like you had 10 heads. It's like, they would have been like, yeah, this is such a great idea. Why haven't we thought about this? But instead they pushed back, which is, you know, a lot of times with the older generation is, you know, this is how we've always done it. And then why are you trying to disrupt what we're doing? And it seems that you are a disruptor. Obviously you're an entrepreneur. So that's really cool to see. I remember when we spoke to you, you mentioned that there is a huge opportunity in oil and gas to come out with new processes and automation, new technologies. I think you mentioned that still a lot of companies could be using things like paper and writing things down when there's all these cool apps and ways to automate. Can you tell us a little bit about the future that you see in oil and gas?
Yeah, and yeah, like I think like the easiest way to start is like exactly what you're talking about, like the generational thing, right? So like, and I'll obviously center my examples around the control room because that's where I come from. But like control room operations now, it's like a bunch of 30-year-olds, right? And so like they're sitting there and they're like, okay, my phone can do this. Why can't the pipeline? Right?
Yeah.
So like the generational shift is definitely starting to happen where people are super, super open to new ways of doing things. And to them, it's not even new ways. It's just like, okay, I do this on my computer. So why
can't, yeah. What is holding us back?
Yeah, like why can't this be automated, right? And so in in the control room environment, like what really, it's a very, very stressful job. Like it can be, you can have hours of just sitting there, nothing happening. But when things explode, or not explode, but when like the activities get really intense, like because there's no explosions ever, but like when the activities get really intense, it's like you're just your head's spinning, right? And like if you're trying to start up a major asset, like you can be breaking a sweat, like you can't leave the desk, like it gets really intense. So it's like, well, why can't we start automating out some of it? And when I was training, it was still paper procedures, checklists, and rules of thumb, tribal knowledge, like 6 to 12 month training periods. And like the thing that I think in the control room that executives in the industry are really missing the point on is these people sitting in this desk, if you don't treat them well and they walk out, your multi-billion-dollar asset shuts down and you actually have no risk mitigation, right? Like now you got a bunch of 30-year-olds in there. Like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And what's interesting too about your story is that you actually prepared an entire presentation to pitch to the company that you were working at the time on this idea for this new design process for the control room and like how to automate it. And which, they could have saved millions, and you even showed them that, and they simply shut you down just because they were uncomfortable probably with, change is what I would assume.
Yeah.
A lot of people on this podcast really can relate to, going to their employer, having a great idea, maybe even wanting to move positions and constantly being shut down because it's not what their employer wants for them. So what advice do you give to the individuals that are in this circumstance, and how did you come out of it? Because you've now just started your own company. So what happened, after you did this and they turned you down?
Yeah. So to elaborate a little bit more, like I put together, like we pulled all the my co-founder and I, because he was consulting at the time, we pulled all the historical data together. I made a business case for revenue generation of an additional $12 million a year through this automation. And it was still said no. And I was asking for $1 million budget to execute on it. And this was after having already completed a project in a control system project that enhanced revenue by $4 million a year on the same asset. So like they knew I could do it. But it was just, like, nope, we can't approve budget for that. So I think this, it comes back to the individual it's if you're pitching ideas and they're not getting listened to, you need to do some self-reflection on like what you want for you and what success means to you. Because like, if, it depends on your life situation, right? Like if you've got a couple of kids and you can't take a big risk, then you need to understand and get comfortable with what is the change that you can make in your environment, right? Or do the changes even mean that much to you? Like maybe you're fine where things are. But if you're really not fine, going through that exploration process to understand what would actually make you happy, and then either trying to move roles, moving companies, starting your own company, just overcoming the fear, finding the support to overcome the fear. But it really comes back to like, what does success mean to you?
That's incredible. So I believe you left a few either months later because you just realized that you just didn't fit there anymore. So you decided to leave. That's when you decided to get a career counselor.
Oh, I did the career counselor before.
While you were there.
While I was there, because I was so miserable.
You were smart. You weren't waiting to quit to go figure out your life. You were figuring it out as you were going. And I believe he did a lot of tests and the typical, counselors to try to understand your personalities. And all of it would always show up as you're an entrepreneur, kind of taking risks. And that is really who you were versus, hey, you want to stay in corporate. And one day he just said, you have this passion for this software that you want to build. They just said no to you. Why don't you just go start your own business? And that was kind of like one of the little, like sometimes you need somebody to really show you what's been in front of your face your whole life and to go out and do it. My question though is, I feel like throughout your life, you even changed career paths. You did forestry, not wasted, but you did a few years and then it ended up being the career that you chose. And you decided to go into engineering, you had to go do math classes. I feel like a lot of people would have just given up and been like, I don't have another year of my life to go study math again because I want to switch careers. Here, you're already an engineer, you moved across the country, they're shutting you down, and now you're like, okay, I'm going to go try this again. I feel like the majority of people, or I would have been like, man, I should just stay here and just figure out the next 10 years because I would be stressing out about like all the years that I am not building something. But all of this actually ended up being really positive for you because it wouldn't have taken you to where you are today. But what made you not quit?
Well, I think there's the mentality shift too of like, I was building something. It just wasn't concrete and a very linear path, right? So I think like I firmly like, so entrepreneurship is an outcome. Like it's not the job, right? Like it's the outcome. And so I firmly believe that like pursuing that type of lifestyle is a personality trait. And so like, it sucks when it's like glamorized a little bit because I think that sets people up to fail. It's really like my personality is just that I just need to keep pushing. And if I don't keep pushing, like I get really unhappy. Right. And so I need to find ways to keep pushing the envelope. Otherwise, like I will spiral into, significant depression and anxiety. so it's like, but where for some other people, like pushing the envelope like that would put them in anxiety and depression. Right. And so like, that's just knowing yourself and that's okay. And everyone's different. So I think like, in terms of like what like kept me going, it's just straight up personality traits. Like there's nothing special. There's nothing overly inspiring. I think we're all just wired differently. And I just have that personality trait.
When you started the company, people see how you're successful today and they see you on social media. You post a lot. You're really out there. I would say from the vision, like if somebody just went and looked at your profile, they'd be like, wow, this girl's killing it. But for 2 years, you knocked on doors and then like nothing happened. And I feel like you said, entrepreneurship is really glamorized and, you really put your time in. Can you talk about those 2 years and what was the most challenging for you during that time?
Yes, they were brutal. So it's one of those things where you try to just forget about it, like it never happened, right? I'm just here now. But so like Roger and I, my co-founder, we decided to do this, and like Roger's like just a legend in the industry, right? And so like I actually had people comment, they're like, he's partnering with you? I was like, So we, so anyways, Roger and I decided to do this. My husband at the time, like I asked him, I was like, he knew how miserable I was. And I was like, okay, like, I've got some cash, but like not a whole lot, like as in like, like 25,000, that's all I've got. I'm like, I really want to do this. I'm so miserable. Like, can we try to make this work? And like, he's a great partner and was just like, yeah, like, let's give this a try and you go for it. Let's like do a year and see what happens. So in the first year was horrific. Roger and I built a minimum viable product like really quite quickly because we knew the market, we knew the customer, we knew exactly what was needed and what would provide value. What we didn't know is we had never heard of startup companies. We'd never heard of Silicon Valley. We'd never heard of venture capital. We'd never heard of procurement. We've never heard of a sales pipeline. So it was like, it was like, so, and like, I didn't even know, like, because I'd never even heard of these things. It was like, you don't know what you don't know. So I didn't even know where to go to find resources. So I just started like taking meetings with people. And then I learned, you know, there's like, oh, there's like an ecosystem, and there's this thing called Platform Calgary, and there's this thing called Zone Startups. And then people recommend books to me. So I spent like a small fortune in books and just read everything, like pretty much every startup book that has ever been written, I have read. And so for the first year, you know, we still didn't get anywhere. And then we got into like a local kind of just like office space with like a few other startups. So like the learning kind of kept going. You know, like countless customer pitch after customer pitch, but like we didn't, like I didn't even understand, like we would just meet with engineers because that's all we knew, or like control room folks, that's all we knew, but I didn't understand like the buying structure inside of these orgs, and like how you have to have buy-in from the VPs and the managers, and then you have to like, I didn't know any of that. So you know, Roger and I were like getting 2 years into this, and we were just like, we had nothing. Like, you know, we'd get such amazing feedback from people about how great it was, but nobody's buying. So we're like, okay, well, nobody's buying, so this isn't real. So we met a corporate lawyer out of Vancouver. So, and he's like really into startup scene. Like he was Shopify's like early stage lawyer and stuff. So he was like he loved what we were doing. And he immediately introed me to a guy at Y Combinator and a guy at Techstars. And those are the two biggest accelerators in the world. I had never heard of them, of course, which a lot of folks in oil and gas wouldn't have. Like I even did like 3 interviews with Y Combinator, which apparently is pretty tough to get. And I was actually grinding them. I was like, well, why would we move to California? We don't have any customers there.
Yeah, you had no idea what you're getting yourself into at this point.
I was talking to the founder of Pebble, and I didn't even know who he was.
Oh my gosh.
And so like, you know, big exit to Fitbit. So so anyways, then I met the Techstars guys, and it was a way better fit for us because they were just launching an energy program in Norway. So we got into that program, and Roger and I were just like, okay, like what's the worst that can happen? You know, we go and hang out in Norway for 3 months and the company goes nowhere, or we can hang out in Norway for 3 months and something cool happens. So we packed it up and moved to Norway.
Wow, that's a huge undertaking. So you went to Norway, obviously it became successful. So what changed in Norway for you?
Yeah, so Norway was kind of like, the way that I was seeing it is like, this is an opportunity, and I'm going to milk this opportunity. And so then that's I think back to that like tenacity personality trait that, you know, I think people can develop it, but I think there's certain things that we're just born with. And so I actually went to every single onshore facility that had a control room in Norway and just hustled.
I love that. Okay.
And so coming out of the program, we had a customer, and we had 5 angel investors, and like these were really cool angel investors. Like one of them, he sold a company to Schlumberger for, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. And
Wow.
so he came on as an angel investor. Another angel investor that came on, he's very well connected in the venture capital space. And so his condition was, here, I'm going to give you a big check. He's like, but you're going to meet with me every Friday. I'm going to teach you how to raise venture capital. So having the customer and having these connections, it was just like, you know, Roger and I kind of did a little like, let's pinch ourselves, right? Like, oh, I guess this is the thing.
So yeah. That's such an incredible story. I remember when Jamie and I first met you, it's like insane to me to see from hustling 2 years in Calgary, knocking on doors, getting shut down, you not even knowing like how to raise capital or even know what Silicon Valley people do, to now like, having 5 angel investors and just like skyrocketing. And the beauty behind that is you never gave up when it was hard. And that's like the biggest lesson I think out of the podcast is most people give up right when they're so close. You could have given up and then like none of the success would have happened. But what I love about your story is that you always talk about the struggles and how like, don't glamorize entrepreneurship. You really need to have thick skin to be in it. And something that you mentioned to us when we first spoke to you, and we really wanted to share it on the podcast, and super thankful that you're willing to, especially because a lot of our listeners are women, is you mentioned that you recently got divorced, and maybe part of it was because of this drive that you have to chase this big dream of being an entrepreneur and being a CEO, and that comes with very little work-life balance, probably. And yeah, we just wanted to talk about that because they feel like a lot of times women are the ones that are giving up their dreams and their want to be CEO or even just move up in a company because they need to let their husband be the one that's the one leading, and you're really just kind of showcasing that, no, you don't have to. And another thing too is we've always talked about how partners need to be super supportive, whether you're the woman or the man kind of leading the relationship. You need someone that's supporting you all the time in order for you to be successful. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so legally separated in the middle of the divorce. The last like couple of years when, things started really accelerating quite a bit, we've raised the angel round and then 2 rounds of venture capital. We've got, we're public with an amazing customer, Phillips 66. So, we're getting a lot, the traction's really heating up, and I understand, like, from my ex-partner's perspective, right? Like, it's not what he signed up for. And I get that, and I respect that. And I think that we're making like a very adult, brave decision that, this isn't what he wants and it's not what I want, right? Like, I want a partner who's going to be on the bus with me for this, and he wants a partner that's going to be on the bus with him for his stuff. So yeah, it's sad and it sucks. But I think like I could have made the choice to just give this up and stay in that relationship and been miserable, and he could have made the choice to just like do this with me and he would have been miserable, and neither of us made that choice. So I think it's like, it's hard and it sucks, and it's a really inconvenient reality of this type of lifestyle, but like now he gets to go be with someone who's going to make him happy, and I get to do the same. So like it's a win-win. It's just a really, really painful win-win at first.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think sometimes we need to see people like you and say that, okay, that's okay for me, right? We always need to kind of see another woman kind of lead the path to be like, okay, because times are changing, and in the past that was kind of like not well received, whereas now it's like, you go girl, like you go find what makes you happy,
and it's still not well received, right? Like I've totally gotten loads of judgment about it, and I'm sure my partners or my ex-partner is too, but like this is what we feel is best for both of us.
Mm-hmm. And, not the whole world needs to understand either, what is and why y'all are doing things, but we just appreciate that, you're sharing that your struggles. Another example of being an entrepreneur, it's kind of lonely at the top. When you're doing something and you're really that passionate about it, some people just don't want to be along for the ride. And sometimes that can be some of the closest people to you. So it's just another example of how you can't glamorize really what it takes to be at this level. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Like, when it happened, like when like that, my ex and I decided that's what we would do. Like I spent like 4 hours just crying on a Teams call to my co-founder, right? Like, it's like those, it's kind of also too, it is lonely at the top, but the people, you don't even realize the people that you have and how wonderful they are when you're going through something like that. Like, my chief revenue officer, our VP finance, like everybody just stepped up, and cause like for 3 weeks, like I was ugly crying, right?
Yeah, that's one of the hardest things in life. So, thanks for being open on such a open platform to talk about that. And lastly, what we'd like to ask you is, you're a CEO now, very successful, still building, but you've done a lot for yourself, and the building never ends. But what would you have told your younger self? I mean, you're still early 30s. I mean, you started this at age 29, which is astonishing. At 25, what would you have told yourself when you were at that pulp mill and you're kind of trying to figure out your
I think I would have told myself exactly what I did. It's like, if you don't do it, you'll regret it. And so like, whenever it comes down to those hard decisions, I always kind of think about like, would I regret this if I didn't go for it? And then I'll just go for it. And like, I think it's getting comfortable with the fact that like, it's okay to fail, because for me personally, it's easier to live with a failure than it is to live with regret. But that might not be the case for everybody. That's me, right? Like I don't want to regret anything. So I think like convincing my younger self that like, don't stall as much, right? Like you don't need to wait another like 6 months to make this decision. Like you can make this decision now and the outcome's going to be the exact same, except you didn't wait 6 months.
No, that is something I think everybody struggles with, is that first jump, that first leap. And then you look back 2 years and you're like, what was I doing? I waited this long to do this. Yeah. So thank you for sharing. And it definitely shows your passion, your drive. And I'm just so happy you came on the podcast to share your story. Thank you for everything. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Vicki. And if you want to let the listeners know if they are interested in your software, where can they find you? LinkedIn or your website?
Yeah, so I'm all over LinkedIn. So I met you ladies. And so all over LinkedIn. So Victoria or Vicki Knott on LinkedIn. Email is Vicki@CruxOCM.com. So VICKI. Actually, you can pretty much there, my little name. And then of course the website is CruxOCM.com. But yeah, would love to connect with anyone. I do frequent my LinkedIn messages. So I'm if anyone wants to reach out, that's a great place.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.